I'm Toby Holthusen. This video essay is to critique and look at Orientalism in American film and how it affected the Xennial, my generation's view of people in the Middle East through the ways in which they're portrayed in film. Having been born in 1979, I fall into the micro generation, a niche referred to as Xennials. We had the privilege of growing up in a world without internet, but were introduced to internet as we got older. And we grew up on films like the Indiana Jones trilogy, Karate Kid, Aladdin. These all had very strong influences of Orientalism. But first, let's talk about Orientalism. I have to say, when I started my real Middle East film class, I was unfamiliar with the term Orientalism. So what did I do? I went to the World Wide Web and Googled it. What is Orientalism? Contextually, it was easy to figure out that it referred to how the Orient was portrayed, but really it's more how Middle East was portrayed. It was a term coined by writer Edward Said in 1978. And he explored how Orientalistic images appeared in movies and in representations of the Middle East appeared in movies from the dawn of the cinematic era. We are going to explore today Orientalism in one film in particular that I enjoy. And this film harkens back to a time where the Arabian Nights and the tales of those nights with the swashbuckling heroes and the princesses and the sheiks and genies in a bottle were the main focus and main way that Arabs and Muslims were portrayed in movies at the time. As a Xennial, I also grew up in a time where we saw the transition of that representation in film of the Middle East to the more maniacal, terroristic shift that happened after the Gulf War invasion. So I have my generation has the distinct privilege, I would say, of seeing that transition, but also it gives us the ability to look into what we need to change as far as how we view other societies. These sensationalized, over-the-top, stereotypical representations, often racist, played such a huge role in shaping people like myself's view of the outside world. I came from a small town in Texas City and grew up in a white family with a dad who worked and a mom who stayed home, and we were a very typical all-American family. So when I saw Indiana Jones at 4 years old, the hero looked like my father. So it was easy to perpetuate those beliefs in people like me. It wasn't until I got into higher learning and found out about terms like Orientalism that I can see the horrible representations and the horrible effects that these representations had on people of my generation. Today I'm going to focus on one movie that is particularly a favorite of mine. It was released in 2003, Secondhand Lions, and in that movie they harken back to a time when Americans believed in the tales of the Arabian Nights, and that was how the Middle Eastern world was represented in film. And I'm going to touch on some of the stereotypes and some of the ways that we can move past this. I'll also be referencing examples from other movies, but the main movie we're going to critique today and look at as far as its influence on Orientalism, or Orientalism's influence on the film, will be the 2003 film Secondhand Lions. Secondhand Lions speaks to me because it's actually set in the 60s in Texas, which was the time when both my boomer parents were brought up. And so in addition to films, interpretations of other cultures, theirs had their ideas, and the ideas that they grew up on also influenced me. This movie features Haley Joel Osment as Walter. He's a nephew of two eccentric elderly gentlemen, and he goes to live with Summer with them, and in the course of that finds a treasure chest with a picture of a mysterious exotic woman. One of the reasons I am looking at secondhand lines for this, even though it was released in 2003 post 9/11, when most of the film started really depicting Middle Eastern and Arabs as these horrible, maniacal terrorists. The movie itself takes place in the 60s, so it harkens back to a time when that was the perception of the Arabs and Middle Easterners, Northern Africa, is similar to what I grew up with in the Indiana Jones movies, Aladdin, and such as I mentioned before. When Walter finally gets one of his uncles to start telling him the story, he can't get enough of the story of his Uncle Hub saving Princess Jasmine from her jealous lover. And he's just this swashbuckling, sword swinging hero that could make Zorro look bad.
No one, slave trade or a better life, have you seen anything like this bad American who fought 20 men? You're wrong.
From the first flashback scene showing Hub fighting off robed characters and fighting for his lover, and where he's put into prison and there's mounds of gold and jewelry, and it's all symbolic of the stereotypical way in which Muslims and Arabs were portrayed in film at that time in the 60s, in the 70s, up until the discourse happened with America's involvement in the Gulf. And that's when our perception changed. Like I said, this movie came out before that, but it harkens back to a time when this was the commonplace theme for the way that Arabs are portrayed in film. In the film, it shows the brothers in a flashback getting off a ship in Europe before they join the French army to go fight in slave traders in North Africa. When they land in Europe, Europe is portrayed in the way that Europe was in reality. And we saw that a lot in film. In Secondhand Lines, it goes from that realistic portrayal of another country, another far-off destination, to a very unrealistic portrayal of North Africa and the people in the slave trade. Some of it may have been true in its representation. Most portrayal of another country, another far-off destination, to a very unrealistic portrayal of North Africa and the people in the slave trade. Some of it may have been true in its representation. Most of it, as we've discussed, is completely sensationalized and stereotyped. The storyline in Secondhand Lines closely resembles the Arabian Nights tale told in Aladdin. And again, I didn't know much about Orientalism in the way it influenced how I saw the world until I learned of this term in my real Middle Eastern class. We just loved the Disney version, the Aladdin version, took my daughter to see the one on Broadway, and never gave thought to the fact that these people were inaccurately represented. And I feel ashamed of that fact because it wasn't intentional, but it was what the movie makers wanted us to see. And so they accomplished their goal. When, like I had mentioned prior, the turmoil in the Gulf started, I was 10 or 11, and we saw a drastic change in the way that the Middle East was portrayed in film, or the way we thought about those people, because of what was in the media and how they were portrayed in films. And this lasted, it's still today, the terroristic, maniacal theme, that the stereotype that follows Muslims and Arabs in film. Like I said, I chose Secondhand Lions because it harkens back to a time when at least the savagery that was displayed was more of a noticeable, dramatic interpretation than those of war movies like Rules of Engagement in 2000. And I could think of several others off the top of my head, but it took you back to it. For me, at least it was a Disney version of the princess and her savior, And I didn't really think about it in a cultural aspect. And I think that's what is the important thing, and what Edward Said was attempting to do when he coined the term in 1978 in his book. And though he focused on movies in the 19th and 20th century, and more how Europe portrayed and sensationalized Arabs, it is very easy to come to take his points of view and his ideas and look at films in America from that lens. Said's book Orientalism really helped to shed light on the way in which the Eastern world is portrayed through the lens of stereotypes by the Western world. And it's important that we look at films with that knowledge, with that lens, to critically analyze and find out the truths and develop our own opinions and educate ourselves on these cultures so that we can see more equality in the ways in which people are represented in film.